Namaskar, friends. Welcome to the first talk in a series of 108 Dharma talks that I'll be presenting as live Facebook events over the next couple of years. These talks cover a wide range of Buddhist topics, from the Pali Canon to Padmasambhava, and I'm sharing them across multiple venues to reach as many people as possible. Each weekly talk lasts about an hour and airs every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Facebook Live. Some talks come in multiple parts. Today's talk is special. It's based on the very first Buddhist research paper I wrote about 20 years ago for the Nalanda College of Buddhist Studies, Canada's first and, as far as I know, only Buddhist college, which the address for which is nalandacollege.ca, nalandacollegE.ca. Most talks in this series date from the last 10 years and are revisions of presentations I originally gave at the former Buddha Center and other places. You can also find these talks online at Dharmata on palisutas.com, PALISUTTAS.com, and my books are available at Eonic Press, eonicpress.com, EONICPRESS.com. For more about our group, the Universal Buddha Center, visit buddhacenter.ca, BUDDHACENTRE, that's the Canadian spelling, CENTRE, not ER.ca. I hope you find today's talk helpful. Thank you for joining, and I look forward to seeing you again. Now let's begin. The title of today's talk is The Concept of Karma in the Jataka Tales of the Buddha, and we will begin with the introduction. The Jataka, or Stories of the Buddha's Former Births, constitutes, in the 6-volume translation of Professor Cowell, 547 accounts of former lives as Siddhartha Gautama, the historical Buddha, who flourished about 445 before the Common Era. The Jataka is the 10th part of the Nikaya, literally collection of short books, itself the 5th and final part of the Sutta Pitaka, literally basket of threads, meaning a traditional collection of discourses, which is the 2nd part of the Pali Canon of the Theravada Buddhists. The Jataka is preceded by an introduction called the Nidanakatha, literally causal discourse, which summarizes the lives of 27 former Buddhas over many ages, as well as the biography of Gautama himself. The oldest stratum of former birth stories of the Buddha is preserved in the Charya-Pitaka, literally basket of proper conduct, which is the 15th part of the Khuddaka Nikaya. All of the stories in the Charya-Pitaka are repeated in the Jataka. The greatest interest of the Jataka lies in its antiquity. Rice Davids describes it as, quote, a large number of old stories, fables, and fairy tales, unquote. Their inception is attributed to the Buddha himself, who recollected all his past lives after his enlightenment experience. A number of Jataka tales are alluded to elsewhere in the Buddhist scriptures. According to the general mode of presentation of the Jataka, the Buddha would refer to various past life experiences in order to elucidate events in the present involving him and others, which he would explain in detail. Which and how many of these tales actually originated with the Buddha is an open question. However, it is certainly true that the Jataka tales preserve the beliefs and attitudes of early Indian Buddhists in the first centuries of the Buddhist era concerning how karma works itself out in the lives of individuals in general, and how it worked itself out in the lives of the Buddha and some members of his community in particular. The Jataka collection was compiled between 400 and 100 before the Common Era. Moreover, a number of the tales are borrowed from Indian folklore. Thus, the Jataka tales of the Buddha express the attitude of the first Buddhists towards the pan-Indian belief in karma as the main mechanism of causality, a belief that the Buddha himself certainly shared. The worldview of the Nidanakatha, the distant epoch. As previously stated, the Jataka Tales enumerate 547 accounts of the Buddha's previous births as a bodhisattva. However, this number only refers to the number of tales told by the Buddha, or perhaps remembered and collected by his disciples. According to the Nidanakatha, the total number of such births is vast. The Nidanakatha is an optimistic work, dedicated to the theme of the infinite efficacy of the actions or karmas of great men or Mahapurushas. Quote unquote. One thinks of Rahula's definition of karma as the primum mobile of the universe. Quote, will, volition, desire, thirst to exist, to continue, to become more and more, is a tremendous force that moves whole lives, whole existences, which even moves the whole world. This is the greatest force, the greatest energy in samsara. Quote unquote. The Nidanakatha begins with the Buddha Dipankara, in response to whose example our Siddhartha Gautama first resolved to attain Buddhahood. The time of Dipankara himself is uncertain. Our text states that it was quote, 4 asankheyas and 100,000 cycles or kalpas ago. Unquote. However, an asankheya is literally an incalculable period, glossed by the translator as quote, a period of vast duration, unquote, and therefore unknowable, although presumably finite. The interval from the time of Dipankara to our own time is divided into 3 epochs. The distant epoch, from the time of Dipankara to the time that the Bodhisattva left his life as Vesantara and was reborn in the Tusita world. The intermediate epoch, from the time that the Bodhisattva left the Tusita world to the enlightenment of the historical Buddha, about 445 before the Common Era, and the proximate epoch, being the period of 45 years during which the historical Buddha lived and taught, about 480 to 400 before the Common Era. The earliest birth of the Bodhisattva, that is, the birth during which, as previously stated, he resolved to attain Buddhahood, was an Indian of the Brahmin caste, quote, studious, knowing the mantras, versed in the 3 Vedas, master of the science of divination and of the traditions and observances of his caste, quote unquote, named Sumedha, a man of good family going back 7 generations who lived in the city of Amaravati or Amara. Sumedha's parents died young, and rather than inherit the vast fortune of his patrimony, he gave it to the people and became a Himalayan rishi, retiring to a mountain called Dhammaka, where he meditated wearing nothing but bark. This is the story of Sumedha recounted in the Buddhavamsa. Sumedha's renunciation parallels the Buddha's, but what is of particular interest in the account of the Nidanakatha is the intellectual process by which Sumedha came to realize the necessity of nirvana. Quote, for as in the world there is pleasure as the correlative of pain, so where there is becoming there must be its opposite, the cessation of becoming. And as where there is heat, there is also cold which neutralizes it. So there must be a nirvana that extinguishes the fires of lust and the other passions. And as in opposition to a bad and evil condition there is a good and blameless one, so where there is evil birth there must also be a nirvana, called the birthless, because it puts an end to all that is called rebirth. Quote unquote. That is to say, Sumedha realized the necessity of nirvana by realizing from the interdependence of opposites, like Lao-Tzu in the Tao Te Ching, both of whom anticipate Hegel's dialectical logic by 2,500 years. Quoting from the Tao Te Ching, being and non-being give rise to each other, difficult and easy complete each other, long and short contrast each other, high and low depend on each other, sound and tone harmonize with each other, front and back follow each other. quote unquote, and that is from chapter 2 of the Tao Te Ching. That is my translation. At first Sumedha lived in a hut, but soon even this galled him, and he retired to the foot of a tree, where he ate nothing but wild fruits. Soon after, quote, he attained the might of supernormal knowledge, quote unquote. Concurrent with the life of Sumedha, the Buddha Dipankara attained supreme enlightenment. Subsequently he wandered to the city of Rama, where he resided in the monastery of Sudassana with many arhants. One day Sumedha came upon a throng in the road, and asking the reason for the crowd of people, learned that the Buddha had appeared in the world. Sumedha, being already spiritually far advanced, realized that he could attain the fruit of nirvana in his very lifetime, but at the same time, moved by the same compassion for the multitude that had caused him to become a hermit, he rejected that course as being selfish. Encountering Dipankara on a muddy road, he said, quote, let not the Blessed One walk in the mire, nay, let him advance, trampling on my body as if walking upon a bridge of jeweled planks. So saying, he loosed his hair, and spreading in the sooty mire his hermit's skin mantle, roll of matted hair, and garment of bark, he lay down in the mire like a bridge of jeweled planks. Quote unquote. Dipankara's example caused him to renounce immediate enlightenment and pursue the path of a Buddha to save others. This fundamental choice of paths is what led Sumedha to become a Bodhisattva, quote, a Buddha seed, a Buddha shoot, unquote, and committed him to a vast series of subsequent rebirths during which he acquired the, quote, transcendental perfections of a Buddha. Recognizing his future destiny, the Buddha Dipankara offered Sumedha 8 bunches of flowers as he passed, after which Sumedha returned to his mountain retreat. The foregoing description makes it clear that even in early Buddhism, a definite distinction was drawn between the Arhat and the Bodhisattva, the Arhat being one who escapes the cycle of transmigration for himself alone, whereas the Bodhisattva resolves to attain complete Buddhahood for the sake of others. In order to do so, he must undergo a much more rigorous course of training in the 10 perfections, namely giving, morality, selflessness, wisdom, exertion, patience, truth, resolution, goodwill, and equanimity. He must also meet the 8 qualifications: humanity, energy, at that time identified with maleness, ability to attain arhatship, association with teachers, renunciation of samsara, perfection in virtue, self-sacrifice, and earnest determination. The birth stories recited in the Charya Pitaka document the Buddha's efforts to achieve the 10 perfections over many rebirths. This constitutes the complete course of training of a Buddha. The Buddha Dipankara lived for many years, followed by 23 subsequent Buddhas, whose names we need not repeat here. Sumedha was associated with each of these subsequent Buddhas, during which he experienced births as a universal monarch, a Brahmin, a Naga or snake king, a Yaka or nature spirit chief, lion, sage, an ascetic, a Deva king, a Maratha or warrior king, a human king, and finally as Siddhartha the son of Suddhodana and Mahamaya. The Nidanakatha is specific about the lineage of the Buddhas summarized above, including the longevity of all of the Buddhas with whom the Bodhisattva was associated. Thus it is possible to reconstruct a sort of history. The Nidanakatha identifies 7 ages, in each of which 1 to 4 Buddhas appeared, in addition to our own still ongoing age, during which 4 Buddhas have appeared, and a 5th expected in the far future, called Maitreya. The interval from Dipankara to the Buddha is at least millions of years. The intermediate epoch. The Nidanakatha further identifies a class of devas called world arrangers. Devas, literally shining or celestial, commonly mistranslated as gods, are actually spiritually advanced human beings who inhabit higher, more energetic planes of reality close to our own level, many of whom assist less developed human beings in their spiritual development. These devas proclaim the advent of ages, Buddhas, and universal monarchs, 100,000, 1,000, and 100 years in the future, respectively. Each age is characterized by the destruction of the world system by fire every 100,000 years. The proclamation of the Buddha would have occurred during historical times, namely about 1480 before the Common Era, corresponding to the composition of the early hymns of the Rig Veda. According to the Nidanakatha, the future Buddha is elected by an assembly of devas, including the world arrangers aforementioned and the four great kings or maharajas who govern the four worlds of Buddhist cosmogony. Since even a Buddha cannot manifest in samsara in the absence of the right conditions, 5 preconditions are needed: the time, the country, the family, the mother, and the mother's age. The longevity of human beings cannot be too long or too short. If the longevity of human beings is too long, human beings are too self-satisfied to appreciate the first noble truth, namely the ubiquity of suffering and pain. Whereas if it is too short, human beings are too sensual to perceive any possibility of escape, and too short-lived to achieve it. Therefore, the Buddha manifested when the longevity of human beings was about 100 years, though most human beings die before they reach this limit. With respect to the country, the culture of the country must be suitable to support the development of Dharma. Vedic India met this requirement. With respect to the family, the manifestation of a Buddha only occurs in a family of noble rank, either in the warrior or priestly caste. With respect to the mother, a Buddha is only conceived in the body of a woman of great personal purity. The Buddha's conception was accompanied by a dream vision, in which Mahamaya dreamt that a he-elephant, bearing a lotus blossom in his trunk, entered her womb. At his birth, the Buddha's body being inspected and found to be perfect, the ascetic sage Kala Devala, a confidant of the Buddha's father, Suddhodana, predicted that the child would become a Buddha. A young Brahmin of the Kondanya family subsequently confirmed this. 7 other Brahmins, skilled in the signs, quote unquote, predicted that the child would become either a Buddha or a universal monarch. 7 days later, Mahamaya died. The world view of the Jataka, the structure of the Jataka Tales. One or more stanzas of verse organize each of the 547 stories that make up the Jataka, arranged in order according to the number of stanzas quoted in each story, from least to greatest number. Strictly speaking, the stanza of verse alone constitutes the canonical part of the Jataka, the stories themselves being extra-canonical explanations, without which, however, the stanzas themselves are generally unintelligible. The Jataka tales are constructed in the same basic way, consisting of the number and sequence, title, opening words of the first verse stanza, the geographical place where the Buddha is reputed to have told the story, the subject matter of the story, a tale of the present, quote unquote, explaining the circumstances in the present which prompted the Buddha to tell the story, the tale of the past, quote unquote, or the Jataka tale proper, that is, a previous birth rather, of the Buddha and his associates, the link, connection, or lesson, revealing the karmic pattern linking the two stories together, and a conclusion, in which the Buddha reveals the identity of himself and his associates with the characters recounted in the tale of the past. The cosmology of the Jataka tales. The cosmology of the Jataka Tales depicts a hierarchy or continuum of worlds vertically divided into 3 levels: hells, earth, and heavens. As one descends the hierarchy, pain and suffering increase, and longevity decreases, whereas as one ascends the hierarchy, bliss and happiness increase and longevity increases. But no world of the Buddhist cosmos is entirely free from suffering, and no beings in it are immortal. Thus, all beings are essentially similar in that they suffer and are mortal, though to differing degrees. Cheetham provides a complete summary of the fundamental Buddhist cosmological system, divided into 4 or 5 arupa dhatu, form or formless worlds, 17 rupa dhatu, worlds of form, and 22 kama dhatu, worlds of desire, consisting of 5 higher worlds or heavens, the 4 terrestrial continents ruled by the 4 great kings, and 8 hot and cold, 8 cold hells. The Valahasa Jataka refers explicitly to 4 hells, 6 heavens of sense, and 20 worlds of Brahma, 30 worlds in total. In the Lohakumbhi Jataka, 4 adulterers are reborn in 4 iron cauldrons, probably the name of a hell not attested in Cheetham. The Kutidusaka Jataka refers to the great hell of Avicii, and the hell Ruva is referred to in the Mehaka Jataka. Avicii, literally uninterrupted, is the 8th of the hot hells in Cheetham, whereas Ruva is probably the same as Rauava, literally howling, the 4th hot hell in Cheetham. The Baka Brahma Jataka refers to 3 heavens or higher worlds by name, namely Vesapuddha, Subhakina, and Abhisava, as well as higher Brahmaloka heavens, quote unquote. These names are not found in Cheetham, but the latter does refer to the Subhakritsna, literally universal beauty, which may be identical, equivalent, or identical with, or a variation of spelling or pronunciation of Subhakina, and the Abhasvara, literally universal light, which may be a variation of Abhisava, the 9th and 12th Rupa Dhatus, respectively. The Takariya Jataka refers to the lotus hell, quote unquote, which must be Padma, literally lotus, in Cheetham, the 7th cold hell. The Sarabha Miga Jataka refers to the heaven of the 33, quote unquote, which is, of course, Triastrimsa, literally 33 in Cheetham, the world next above our own world ruled by the 4 great kings, or the 4 kings rather. In the same place we learn the name of an inhabitant of one of these worlds, Tudu Brahma. It is apparent that the cosmological scheme of the Jataka Tales is pretty close to the system summarized in Cheetham, perhaps in an earlier stage of formation. The chronology of the Jataka Tales. The chronology of the Jataka Tales is consistent with that discussed above in connection with the Nidanakatha, though less extensive and detailed. In the Lomahamsa Jataka, the Buddha alludes to his life as a Bodhisattva, quote, 91 eons ago, unquote. In the Susima Jataka, the Buddha refers to himself, quote, who have for many 100,000 ages exercised perfection, quote unquote. That is, pursued the paramitas or perfections as a bodhisattva, elsewhere stated to be 100,000 ages. The mechanism of karma. In Pali, karma is derived from the Indian Vedic karman, work, referring especially to the sacrifice, which sense is still retained in Pali in the specialized meaning of ceremony or formal observance, whence doing, deed, work, building, weaving, plating, acting, action. In its applied or pregnant sense, karma is simply causality, that is, action and reaction, or cause and effect. In Buddhism, everything in samsara obeys the law of karma, which is to say that every action necessarily and inevitably produces a complementary reaction that returns upon the active agent for good or ill. Like the quotation from Rahula above, the Pali Text Society's Pali-English Dictionary refers to kamma as, quote, the driving power of the world, unquote. The Jataka Tales show how the mechanism of karma works itself out in the lives of actual sentient beings, specifically the Buddha and his disciples. Situations in the past involving individuals tend to recur over the course of subsequent rebirths. A common phrase found in the Jataka is, quote, to fare according to his deserts, unquote. The preeminent example is the Buddha himself, who in his previous births, as a Bodhisattva, was recurrently reborn in the time of 23 subsequent Buddhas. One may be the active agent or the passive recipient of karma. Personal spiritual realizations may also continue from birth to birth. Thus, the concreteness or physicality of a situation or scenario, if you like, is not what determines its continuity. Paradoxically, although the Buddha taught that there is no ultimate or fundamental entity corresponding to the idea of a self, the karmas produced by individuals are so intricately interwoven that subsequent rebirths produce the illusion of individuality. Thus, the Buddha was able to identify his and other disciples' identities in past births, and the individuals in question are reborn into similar relationships, including ties of blood, friendship, and enmity. Although karma thus tends to form recurrent parallel patterns of mutual experience that reproduce themselves from birth to birth, these karmic patterns are not necessarily explicitly identical to the original patterns in respect of the conditions. Thus, although there is an abstract continuity of similarity, there is also a concrete discontinuity of details produced by differing explicit circumstances. It is as though the karmic pattern waits for a set of contingencies, sufficiently similar to the past pattern to manifest, but not necessarily identical, just as a seed requires certain conditions to grow, but can nevertheless grow in a variety of soils and conditions with varying degrees of fruition. In this way, karma can reproduce itself over a prolonged period, recurrently, until the energy potential that motivates it is exhausted. The body of rebirth itself is an example of the operation of karma. Thus, physical appearance and health problems can be the result of the operation of karma. Just as individual actions may be relatively pleasurable, painful, or neither, so their consequences may be relatively pleasurable, painful, or neither, although all actions are ultimately painful, as proved by the First Noble Truth. Pleasurable actions yield pleasurable results. Painful actions yield painful results, and neutral actions yield neutral results. Similarly, there are actions conducive to liberation, and there are actions conducive to bondage. Actions conducive to liberation produce results that are conducive to liberation, whereas actions conducive to bondage produce results that are conducive to bondage. Thus, the law of karma, once it is understood, in and by itself produces a strong incentive to engage in positive actions and to refrain from negative actions without any need to invoke Fraser's fickle and wayward deity. The law of karma also implies a significant degree of control over one's future destiny, since the energy of the karmic patterns, once fully manifested in the conditions proper to them, is exhausted. Therefore, the possibility arises of the arising of new and different karmic patterns as a function of the reflexivity of the volitional process with which karma itself is intimately intervolved. It appears, therefore, that volitions themselves are not merely automatic reflex reactions to prior actions, although they can be. The experiential or karmic pattern is the link or connection that joins the two stories together. From this is derived a moral lesson. Beings closer to the enlightened state, but still unenlightened, are more subtly aware and may remember more than their present births. Beings at a higher level of development are more aware of the higher worlds than beings at a lower level of development. Sentient beings may evolve or devolve depending on their karma. The process by which lower beings become unaware of their previous births in higher worlds is likened to a process of forgetfulness or confusion and is associated with the rebirth process itself. The Buddha himself, having achieved the epitome of consciousness, remembered his past lives and existed in a state of complete and perfect self-awareness to the degree of realizing his own non-self-existence. Thus, the slightest incident might trigger a past life memory in the Buddha, who would allude to incidents in his previous lives as casually as his present life. Not only the Buddha, but sometimes others as well are represented as remembering their past lives and responding to him on this basis. Types of karmic consequences. Specific examples of karmic consequences include the Buddha's speech, the beauty of which is said to be a result of many lives of truth-telling, a goldsmith's purity, which is said to be the result of many lives spent purifying gold, a monk's insignificance, which is said to be a result of previous sins, despite devotion to prayer, high aspiration, and true discipleship in this life. Perhaps most interesting in this category is an elder who, quote, while still alive, became a preta in the world of men, preta, of course, being a hungry ghost, presumably, unquote, presumably referring to some kind of wasting disease. Kinds of rebirths. The kinds of rebirths described in the Jataka Tales are diverse. The following table gives the number of births of the Bodhisattva of each kind, which are also representative of the generality, although the Bodhisattva is usually presented as a wise, righteous, and compassionate leader, based on the table produced by Spence Hardy's Pandit and reproduced in Buddhist birth stories, which I will summarize. 85 lives as a king, 83 lives as an ascetic, 43 lives as a tree god, 26 lives as a teacher, 24 lives as a courtier, 24 lives as a Brahmin, 24 lives as a king's son, 23 lives as a noble, 22 lives as a learned man, 20 lives as Saka, the ruler of the Devas, 18 lives as a monkey, 13 lives as a merchant, 12 lives as a man of property, 11 lives as a deer, 10 lives as a lion, 8 lives as a wild duck, 6 lives as a snipe, 6 lives as an elephant, 5 lives as a cock, 5 lives as a slave, 2 lives as a fish, 2 lives as an elephant driver, 2 lives as a rat, 2 lives as a jackal, 2 lives as a crow, 2 lives as a woodpecker, 2 lives as a thief, 2 lives as a pig, 1 life as a dog, 1 life as a curer of snake bites, 1 life as a gambler, 1 life as a mason, 1 life as a smith, 1 life as a devil dancer, 1 life as a student, 1 life as a silversmith, and 1 life as a carpenter, 1 life as a waterfowl, 1 life as a frog, 1 life as a hare, 1 life as a kite, 1 life as a jungle cock, and 1 life as a fairy. The following table categorizes the rebirths in the previous table, giving the gross percentage in each category. Animal, 30%, human, 28%, worldly, 24%, noble, 7%, superhuman, 5%, religious, 4%, and military, 1%. The 6 modes of existence. The Jataka Tales clearly portray the Buddha and his disciples moving through 6 distinct modes of rebirth. In suffering states as hell beings, hungry ghosts, and animals, in intermediate or mixed states as human beings and anti-gods or asuras, and in blissful states as divine beings. Of these, human beings are the rarest mode of existence, but with the greatest potential for supreme enlightenment. However, Human beings also move freely between rebirths as hell beings, hungry ghosts, animals, and divine beings. The Buddha himself, in one of his Bodhisattva births, was reborn as a hell being who suffered for 80,000 years in recompense for a previous birth in which he spent 20 years as a king. Sages and the Buddha himself are represented as taking rebirth in animal forms, even birds. Thus, there is little distinction in Buddhism between the spiritual state of animals and humans. Most humans are only slightly more evolved than animals and may easily be reborn as animals, and vice versa, whereas the Buddha is never represented as having been born as a female. The act of truth. A particularly interesting category of karma that recurs throughout the Jataka Tales is the act of truth, or satya karma, so called. In pan-Indian thought, truth itself is believed to possess its own intrinsic power by virtue of its ontological status as an expression of the creative power of reality. Similarly, traditional philosophy always ascribes power to the magical word, which creates existence, or maya. Thus, the Vataka Jataka tells of a jungle fire that went out as soon as it approached the Buddha. The Buddha says, quote, "It is no present power of mine, brethren, that makes this fire go out on reaching this spot of ground. It is the power of a former act of truth of mine. For in this spot no fire will burn throughout the whole of this eon, the miracle being one which endures for an eon." Unquote. The tale of the past elaborates on this as follows, quote, "In this world there exists what is termed the efficacy of goodness and what is termed the efficacy of truth. There are those who, through their having realized the perfections in past ages, have attained beneath the Bo tree to be all enlightened, who, having won release by goodness, tranquillity, and wisdom, possess also discernment of the knowledge of such release, who are filled with truth, compassion, mercy, and patience, whose love embraces all creatures alike, whom men call omniscient Buddhas. There is an efficacy in the attributes they have won, and I too grasp one truth. I hold and believe in a single principle in nature. Therefore it behooves me to call to mind the Buddhas of the past, and the efficiency they have won, and to lay hold of the true belief that is in me touching the principle of nature, and by an act of truth to make the flames go back, to the saving both of myself and of the rest of the birds." Unquote. In this tale the Buddha was reborn as a quail chick. And continuing the quotation, "Therefore it has been said, there's saving grace and goodness in this world. There's truth, compassion, purity of life. Thereby I'll work a matchless act of truth, remembering faith's might and taking thought on those who triumphed in the days gone by. Strong in the truth, an act of truth I wrought." Accordingly, the Bodhisattva, calling to mind the efficacy of the Buddhas long since passed away, performed an act of truth in the name of the true faith that was in him, repeating this stanza: "With wings that fly not, feet that walk not yet, forsaken by my parents, here I lie. Wherefore I conjure thee, dread Lord of Fire, primeval Jataveda, turn, go back." Even as he performed his act of truth, Jataveda went back a space of 16 lengths, and in going back the flames did not pass away to the forest, devouring everything in their path. No, they went out there, and then, like a torch, plunged in water. Therefore it has been said, "I wrought my act of truth, and therewithal the sheet of blazing fire left 16 lengths unscathed, like flames by water met and quenched." And as that spot escaped being wasted by fire throughout a whole eon, the miracle is called an eon miracle. "Thus, brethren," said the Master, "it is not my present power, but the efficacy of an act of truth performed by me when a young quail, that has made the flames pass over this spot in the jungle." Quote, unquote. Similarly, elsewhere a woman who has no witness as to the father of her child appeals to an act of truth to prove his paternity. An ascetic and the parents of a boy bitten by a snake, having no antidote, appeal to an act of truth to heal the boy. A master mariner saves 700 souls from shipwreck by an act of truth. A Pacceka Buddha sets free all enslaved creatures by an act of truth. A king restores his eyesight rather, by means of an act of truth. A king saves his son from an ogre by an act of truth. A snake king causes the head of a false ascetic to burst asunder. A woman heals a leper by means of an act of truth. An elder saves the life of a woman in childbirth by means of an act of truth. And a king heals a man-eater by an act of truth. The magical character of the act of truth is readily apparent, but the core idea is that the effective power of the karma of merit or virtue can be consciously harnessed and intentionally directed by an act of will of a sufficiently virtuous person. The Buddhist act of truth recalls the traditional motif of a sacred substance produced by spiritual practice, which inheres or inheres in the body and in nature, people, objects, and places. A spiritually developed being can utilize this substance in sufficient concentration to produce physical phenomena, including healings. The act of truth is clearly associated with a method, preeminently a solemn pronouncement, recited in verse, analogous to a magical incantation or spell, and sometimes with a ritual action, including the use of a special object, such as a bowl or a pitcher of water. The assumption underlying the act of truth is the same as the doctrine of karma. Thoughts and words, that is, consciousness, are not essentially different from so-called physical objects. All phenomena are equally real, mutually co-determining, and inhere in the same ground, namely emptiness. Thus, mental thoughts and words are as real and efficacious as physical objects. Summary. The original Buddhists believed that samsara is essentially illusory, governed by a causal law that makes no distinction between thoughts, words, and deeds, and in which no cause fails to produce a precisely appropriate effect that returns to the agent in the form of experience. This law of karma is fundamental, ubiquitous, automatic, and determinative, but is ultimately illusory as the world that it governs. Thus, there is the possibility of escape. The Buddha is the first human being in this historical dispensation to have made good his escape from samsara. Thus, he is the highest teacher, and his teaching the highest teaching. His experiences in his pursuit of supreme enlightenment constitute the subject matter of the Jataka. By attaining arhatship and perfecting the 10 perfections of a Buddha, the Bodhisattva pursued the goal of Buddhahood in many different sentient forms, including men, superhuman beings, animals, and even hell beings. Once he resolved to attain Buddhahood, it took him 24 subsequent rebirths to attain enlightenment, not always as a human being. The attainment of enlightenment is by definition the perfection of consciousness. Thus, the Buddha remembered all his former lives, which he discussed freely in the course of his teaching work, when prompted to do so by the recurrence of a set of circumstances similar to those that occurred in a previous birth. During his rebirths as a Bodhisattva, the Buddha was reborn in the company of a series of Buddhas. Similarly, many of the Buddha's disciples had themselves shared many previous births with him, and many of these disciples in this historical dispensation attained arhatship under the Buddha's tutelage. The practice of virtue and meditation are profoundly karmically efficacious. Thus, an enlightened being is not merely a man of knowledge, he is also a man of power. Even ordinary but virtuous people can consciously call upon the power of karma to change karma. The power of karma is the primum mobile of the universe and the secret spring of phenomenality. Okay, that completes today's talk. I will conclude with the dedication of merit, whereby we dedicate the merit of this talk to all beings. Please feel free to join me in this and share the merit. According to the Buddha, based on the law of cause and effect, everything one thinks, says, and does has a result. Every result is in turn a cause of further results in an infinitely interconnected network of cause and effect. The Dharma itself is especially efficacious. It creates beneficial results wherever it spreads. This effectiveness is the power of truth. A common term for this effect is merit. Most of the merit of teaching or even talking about Dharma returns, not only to the speaker, but also to the listeners. The dedication of merit establishes the intention to sacrifice the merit that one receives in favor of others. The dedication of merit is an act of generosity. Generosity itself is karmically efficacious, and thus generates more merit. By redirecting the merit that one receives to others, the dedication of merit acts like an amplifier, redirecting ever greater merit to others. Thus one becomes an agent of ever-increasing merit. The dedication of merit causes the merit of the Dharma to spread exponentially through the whole system. So please feel free to join me in this. By the merit of this talk, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss Dharma. As always, it is my pleasure and privilege, and I will be returning here at Facebook Live events next Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for another Dharma talk in the series. Namaskar.